The Indigenous Coordinating Body, which is committed to enhancing the participation of Indigenous peoples, governments, and representative institutions at the United Nations. Mr. Ohorella, you have the floor.
This is the Go Maluku podcast.
I think that's my cue. Tabea upulai matibinane kai marumakau bay holiness ainei tunai kai atetlebui nusaku saki tipusumi menamuria. Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the expert mechanism, chairperson and members of the Permanent Forum, Mr. Special Rapporteur, Your Excellencies, representatives of Indigenous peoples and member states, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to express my appreciation on behalf of the Indigenous Coordinating Body to address this expert mechanism in my capacity of ICB Executive Secretary. Established in 2020 by Indigenous peoples gathered at the second dialogue meeting held in Quito, Ecuador, the ICB is mandated to facilitate cooperation and consultation amongst Indigenous peoples. With members from each of the 7 social-cultural regions, we work diligently to enhance the participation of Indigenous peoples' representative institutions within the United Nations, particularly in the General Assembly, as well as the Human Rights Council. Chair, it is my pleasure to recount the progress we have made in the enhanced participation process in the context of the Human Rights Council since the 15th session of this meeting. But before I do that, let us contemplate the words of the esteemed Chief Descahe on Monday, words that echo the sentiments of many Indigenous governments globally, wanting to address the United Nations when rightful recognition is bestowed upon them as self-governing entities, as governments. And that is because the current non-governmental organization participation model does not adequately acknowledge or validate the status and sovereignty of Indigenous governments. Indigenous peoples with perspectives honed since time immemorial bring unparalleled voices to the table, enriching discussions on peace and global matters. Yet these valuable insights remain unheard, underrepresented, and confined to the realm of quote-unquote indigenous issues. So let me answer 3 frequently posed questions on the topic of enhanced participation. First, why is indigenous direct UN participation essential? It is simple. Diversity is strength. Indigenous peoples possess a wealth of diverse cultures and lived experiences. By ensuring their direct participation, we ensure that these authentic, invaluable voices help shape global dialogues. This is not just about fulfilling a quota or ticking a box. It's about valuing and utilizing the unique perspectives that only Indigenous peoples can provide. That is not merely a matter of what's right, it's also about what's smart and beneficial for us all. Second, why is NGO participation not sufficient for Indigenous participation? The difference, while subtle, is significantly impactful. Indigenous peoples are not NGOs. We are distinct, self-determining nations. We have unique rights and responsibilities that cannot be fully encapsulated within the NGO framework. And this is about more than simply offering a seat at the table. It's about ensuring that Indigenous voices can stand alone and be heard in their own right. And finally, why aren't Indigenous issues just civil society issues? It is easy to perceive Indigenous issues as part of the wider spectrum of civil society concerns. It seems intuitive. However, let me introduce a new frame of reference for you to consider. Indigenous peoples are not merely part of civil society. We are distinct entities as original inhabitants and the self-determining nations with our own civil societies. The issues we face, our stories, and our aspirations bear unique weight. We demand not just acknowledgement, but unique consideration. Yes, it's essential to ensure the active participation of Indigenous people's civil societies. But we must also be cautious not to allow this participation to contest the status of Indigenous governments and representative institutions. These roles that these governments have been sculpted by centuries of tradition and sovereignty, and they are the unique voices of their peoples. In light of these discussions, a clear pathway emerges. To avoid ambiguity and to respect the unique status of Indigenous peoples as self-governing entities, it becomes evident that we should henceforth refer to this process as the enhanced participation of Indigenous peoples' representative institutions. This term underscores the truth that the process is about advancing the standing of the collective institutions that represent Indigenous peoples, not merely individual representatives. This distinction is crucial, not just for the sake of clarity, but to honor the rich histories, cultures, and inherent rights of indigenous peoples. By embracing this refined terminology, we're not simply adjusting our language. We are reaffirming our commitment to better understand and respect the distinctive status of indigenous peoples within the global community. Mr. Chair, we convened this week to discuss the urgent challenges confronting indigenous peoples across the globe. These range from a lack of recognition that undermines our capacity to advocate for our rights in political spaces, forced displacement from our homelands for purposes such as sustainable development, conservation, or climate mitigation, the continuous dangerous conflation of local communities with indigenous peoples, to the exploitation of our lands, territories, and resources due to militarization. However, in contrast, today we can discuss how the UN can eliminate the hurdles in addressing these issues. These hurdles include inability to discuss pertinent topics at meetings, the requirement to register as NGOs, and the restricted access to meetings that directly impact us. We also do not have the ability to submit documents and communications concerning the work of the General Assembly or the Human Rights Council. It is apparent that the existing opportunities and participation methods do not adequately include indigenous peoples' representative institutions. Therefore, the ICB, since the expert mechanism 15th session, has been tirelessly working so that our contributions are communicated from government to government. So let's review our progress, which includes, but is not limited to, our global virtual informal dialogues, which have enabled and informed and participatory community, offering a platform for feedback, coordination, and mutual recognition and learning. Obviously, our advocacy during the 51st session of the Human Rights Council, and the participation in the resolution on the rights of indigenous peoples. And in the same vein, we continue to express our gratitude for the main sponsors of the resolution, the governments of Mexico and Guatemala, for their flexibility and leadership. The OHHR workshop, which has been referenced before on enhanced participation, allowed us to collaborate with various stakeholders to improve indigenous people participation in the council meetings. Reflecting on the workshop, it addressed key issues, including participation venues, modalities, accreditation mechanism, and criteria for accreditation. The success of the workshop was underscored by indigenous peoples as well as member states, and was evidenced by the summary report, closely reflecting our objectives to fortifying our future strategies. We also participated at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and took an active role in the PGA hearing that was held in the margins. To advance the cause of enhanced participation of indigenous peoples, we proposed a roadmap, comprising 7 crucial recommendations that, when acted upon, will foster a new era of inclusion and mutual respect within the United Nations. First, we requested actual mechanisms to acknowledge and welcome the valuable report of the High Commissioner on Human Rights workshops held in November last year. Second, we asked the Human Rights Council and the expert mechanism to recognize the tireless work of the Indigenous coordinating body, and also appeal to states and potential donors to support the work of the ICB. Third, we asked the Council to continue to explore further steps and measures to enable and facilitate the active participation of indigenous peoples' representative institutions in its work. And in terms of process, we asked the Council to request the Office of High Commissioner to convene 4 two-day workshops to be concluded by February 2025, inviting the participation of indigenous peoples and states, and encourage submission of written contributions aiming to enhance the participation of indigenous peoples in the Council's work. And the fifth, we asked the President of the Human Rights Council or representative thereof, in addition to a co-chair nominated by indigenous peoples, to preside over these workshops and prepare reports with the Office of High Commissioner with the aim of drafting a resolution on enhanced participation to be submitted to the Council prior to this 59th session. We further invite the Council to request the Office of High Commissioner, as part of preparatory reports for the workshops, to collaborate with the Indigenous coordinating body to organize regional workshops. And finally, we ask the Voluntary Fund to assist representative indigenous peoples to participate in said workshops. To conclude, Mr. Chair, these 7 recommendations embody our collective commitment to enhancing the participation of indigenous peoples within the United Nations. By endorsing them, we pledge to a future that embraces inclusion, respects, and mutual collaboration in our global discourse. In the same vein, we invite EMRIP, the UN Special Rapporteur, to inform on indigenous issues to participate in said workshops, ensuring correct interpretation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As you all contemplate these recommendations, we ask you to look beyond the written words, to the intent and spirit that underlie them. To create the inclusive space we envision, the UN and its member states must be ready to generously interpret the rules of procedures, for rigidity often stands in the way of innovation and progress. Nearly a decade has passed since the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, which has outlined a transformative vision in its outcome document. Today, you're a call to action, to demonstrate the strides we have made and the path we are willing to continue. This is also the moment to validate the trust and aspirations embedded in that historic document. In the spirit of collaboration and mutual respect, let's provide unwavering support to the ICB and the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. And as a good example, we extend our gratitude to the Government of Canada, Suriname in particular, as their foresight and demonstrated leadership has been invaluable. They saw the importance of financial participation, supporting the inclusion in these peoples, and providing financial resources to the Indigenous coordinating body. This commitment has been instrumental in realizing the goals set forth a decade ago. We applaud this endeavor and urge other member states to follow this enlightened path. Mr. Chair, as I look forward to the contribution from the floor, allow me to conclude by saying that we must remember that our collective aim is to build a UN system that embraces all, that hears all, and that works for all. By endorsing the broadest and most generous implementation of these recommendations, they move a step closer to that ideal. We open the doors to rich cultures and diverse perspectives, unlocking new pathways to peace, justice, and sustainability. This is a call to action, to evolve, to grow. 100 years after Chief Deskai arrived in Geneva to deliver on the promise of financial participation of Indigenous peoples' representative institutions made nearly a decade ago. Mate Bulu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ohorella, for your remarks and for sharing the work of the Indigenous Coordinating Body and also addressing the future perspective, how best we can address collectively in the mechanisms and other Indigenous bodies.
My friends, you can now also listen to the Go Maluku podcast on Spotify. Listen while you use other apps or do other things. If you don't have Spotify, just open your Apple or Google Podcast or your favorite podcasting app and search for the Go Maluku podcast.